You have questions? We have answers. Welcome to the Therapist Question Box with your host, Miss Lindsay Schiss.
Welcome back to another episode of the Therapist Question Box, where we are here to tackle your toughest questions. Remember, you can ask away at our website, therapyutah.org, or you can get on our podcast page and you can ask a question there as well. We love your questions and we love to help in any way that we can and are here to help answer your questions. Today we have Whitney Evans with us. Whitney, thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you know what? I'm really happy that you're here because this is actually a question that you brought up to me and said you're hearing a lot of this in the therapy room. So why don't you tell our listeners, you go ahead and tell our listeners what the question has been.
I always hear this question and always have as a therapist. And I've also heard this question in my own mind and in my own heart.
Yep.
How do I tame that inner critic?
Okay. How do I tame that inner critic? Mm-hmm. It's a big one.
It's a big one.
And like you said, it's pretty much universal.
Yes.
Like we all have it. Mm-hmm. All your clients have it. We all experience that. Yeah. So let's talk about that. How do we silence or get rid of that inner critical voice in a person's head? Let's first just get curious. Like, what is that inner voice? Maybe where does it originate from?
Well, if it's all right, let's start by talking about different parts of us.
Okay.
You've seen the movie Inside Out.
Love it so much.
And most recently, Inside Out 2. What is it that you love about it? Can I ask you that?
What I love is I think it gives understanding and words for what we all experience.
Yeah.
It really does. It's like we all know we have different parts of us that feel differently. But Inside Out 2 did such a good job of bringing it to a very basic level with kids in mind.
Yeah.
And so it resonates for everyone. And we all know we have different parts of us. So I loved the way they did that. That's number one. The second thing, I loved that they helped destigmatize these parts of us that seem like they're bad and that they're causing trouble. Like in Inside Out 2, when Riley had the anxiety, came up. And at the end of the movie, do you remember anxiety says, like, I was just trying to help. Yeah. And I loved that it really brought down like, oh, anxiety is not bad. It's actually trying to do a job. Yeah. So those are the things. I think it was so well done. I think everybody should watch it and rewatch it. I mean, granted, I'm a therapist, but it was amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I've only heard that from people that have seen it. I love what you highlighted, that at the end of that show, anxiety says, I was only trying to help.
Yes.
And I'd love to start this discussion by just establishing that truth, that all of our internal parts have positive intention. They are all only just trying to help. Even that critical voice, which can be really surprising to people when I first suggest that idea. Mm.
Can you explain that? Because I think that, let's start just right there. Because when you think of anxiety, you think of like a critical part. Mm-hmm. How can that have a good intention? Will you speak to that?
For sure. So let's talk about some different parts for just a minute in order to set a stage here. So we all have protective parts of us, and they have different jobs, different strategies, different ways of protecting us. We all have little inner child parts is what we often refer to those parts as, right? That inner child, the parts of us that are wounded or hurt or carry burdens most often brought from childhood and adolescence. And we all have a sense of self. That is who we are at our core. That has always been there. It's been maturing. It's been present. And it's often covered up by protective parts or young wounded parts. So if we think about these three
let's break it down.
Different kinds of parts.
So we have, I'm going to interrupt really quick. So we have three different kinds of parts. Mm-hmm. We have the wounded inner child, usually younger parts of us. Yeah. We have protective parts of us that are trying to keep us safe.
Yeah.
Right? And then tell us the other part that you talked about.
Our self-energy.
Our self-energy. Okay. And this is who we've always been.
Yeah.
This is who we are.
That's how I see it.
Like that we were born with this self.
Born with a sense of self.
Okay. Yep. Great. Okay. So keep breaking it down.
Yes. So when we are wounded and hurt as children, and we always are, even in the best of circumstances, there are things that happen that cause pain and distress in our soul. And so we'll have a protector figure out pretty quickly a strategy how to manage that. So, for example, when I was young, because of certain circumstances and things happening in my family of origin, I really quickly, because of wounds I was experiencing, developed a protective part of me that learned pretty quickly, if I just do everything right, then I'm not going to be as hurt. And it felt very much like a people-pleasing part, a part that managed other people's emotions, other people's experiences. And that part helped in a lot of ways when I was young.
Okay.
Now that I'm older, that part would still show up in my life. Again, people-pleasing, struggling to say no, doing behaviors that were not helpful for me, but intended to make sure other people were okay so that they didn't hurt me.
Got it.
I also have an inner critic that talks really poorly to that people-pleaser part. There is conflict between those two parts.
Why?
Because that people-pleasing part doesn't really help me feel better inside. It doesn't really fill the hole, the hurt that was created when I was younger.
But it's trying to.
It's trying to.
Best job.
It's doing its very best job. But it's not
really effective at it.
It doesn't really help because we really, at the end of the day, we can't fix other people.
Yeah.
So
then you have a critical part that is saying, wait a minute, that doesn't really help. Why are you doing that? That's stupid.
Why would you do that? And it's that kind of a voice. I can hear that part. That's how I experience that part. It's auditory. And oftentimes that is how we experience that critical part. That's why we talk about it like an inner critic, of a voice that I hear, right?
Right.
Why would you do that? And you see what my face is doing? I can visualize that part of me. I know what it looks like when it gets activated, when it steps forward and tries to run the show in my life.
What happens? When you said you know what it feels like, what happens?
Yeah. I hear that voice in my head. I start to feel in my body irritation. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin. And that then translates to unhelpful behaviors, unhelpful relationship strategies, the way I'm functioning my relationships, the way I'm treating my children, the people around me. If that critic is trying to be in charge, it shows.
Got it.
In a lot of unhelpful ways.
So the critic, though, is still trying to do a job that it's not trying to hurt you. It's not trying to make you feel horrible about everything. It's trying to do a job.
It's trying to help by making that people pleaser part quit doing that job.
Because it knows it's not actually helping you.
It's not actually helping.
But does the critical part, how is that helping you?
Yeah. It's trying to get that part to quit doing that job.
Okay.
That's its positive intent. If I can make that part feel bad enough, it'll stop people pleasing.
Okay. That's really important what you just said, is the positive intent. Like it doesn't feel good to feel like you got this critical voice inside of your head.
Yeah.
But its intention is saying, hey, people pleasing part, this actually doesn't make you feel better. It's not really working. So we're going to show up really loud and critical because we can see that this is not helpful.
And it's really important to distinguish the behavior of the part and the intent of the part.
Absolutely.
The behavior of that critical part isn't helpful. The intent is a positive, protective intent.
Okay. So let's go back to Inside Out.
Okay.
2. So if an Inside Out 2, right, she has these protector parts that you're talking about. Would you say all those parts are protector parts of her?
Protectors. And there's different kinds of protectors. Some are more managerial in style. They're very high functioning. They help us just keep things on the rails. They keep life moving along. And oftentimes we do a really good job of that. We're all walking around with hurt, but most people don't see our hurt because we've got parts of us that do really socially acceptable protective jobs, like people pleasing.
Got it. So some of them we don't even know. We just think, oh, that's like who I am or how I function this way. Yeah. You know, I find it really helpful when I will talk about anxiety with a client, let's say, and instead of saying I'm anxious, you know, the client will say, I'm anxious or whatever. And I will say, well, let's just talk about it like a part of you is anxious. Right. And when we break it down, really getting clear, like, oh, actually that part of you is trying to protect you from something. It's doing a job, right? Its intention, like you said, is different than actually what ends up happening.
Its behavior is.
Right. What its behavior is. So if we go back to it, is our goal to then quiet that inner critic, to silence it? I mean, because it feels horrible, but, and it feels really negative. What's our job? How do we manage this? Because it feels yucky. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. So ultimately, our opportunity is to get more clarity on the difference between our parts, to get clarity on the difference between our sense of self, that self energy that's at our core.
Self is who we've always been.
Who we've always been. Dr. Richard Schwartz describes self in a way that I really love. He uses 8 words that begin with C. Calm, confident, connectable, creative, curious, courageous,
compassion,
right? There's also maybe a 9th descriptor of self-energy that I love, and it's gratitude. It doesn't start with C, but I love to describe a sense of self with gratitude.
You know, go ahead. Here's what I was going to say. I think there's a lot of times where we don't feel that we have been in self-energy for a very long time. So we have had these parts of us really running the show. Yeah. And the idea of being connected and curious and compassionate and having gratitude, that feels far away.
It is very foreign to most of us, especially in the beginning, because like you said, we're used to surviving and living in these protective parts, running the show. And it can be really helpful to have some professional help in the beginning, especially as you're learning to distinguish between that sense of self that's always been there. I like to think of it in terms of the sun. The sun comes up every morning. It's always there. When it's cloudy and stormy, we don't see the sun. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that the clouds and the storm are what is forward.
Like that's what we're
running
seeing.
The show.
Yes.
Yep. So part of our job is to get in touch with, well, what does that sunshine feel like? Where is it? Where has it been? And it's the sense of self, the sunshine's job to offer healing to the different parts.
Okay, so how does that even happen? Because, wow, we all know, like, that's wonderful. Okay, thank you. I want that sunshine to come out after the storm.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? Especially when you said, boy, these parts have been running the show for so long that we don't even recognize those parts of ourselves, that self-energy. We don't even recognize that in ourselves anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say to a person who would say, I don't know. I have been so anxious for so long, or I have been so self-critical for so long. How do I find that self-energy that I was born with?
Yeah. It's a process of differentiation. I love that word.
Okay, explain that word first of all.
We're just making different.
Okay.
These different parts of us. And I love the way Inside Out and Inside Out 2 portray that. Riley's parts are different from each other. They have different jobs, and we see those jobs play out in the movies. They have different colors. They look different. They have their own personality. They have their own way of showing up. They have different tones of voice. They have different ways of speaking. So part of our work when we're getting to know parts is finding how do we experience those parts differently. So if I'm sitting with a client and we're talking about anxiety or we're talking about a people pleaser part, I'll ask that client, well, okay, tell me, how do you experience that part of you? So for example, the inner critic, when it shows up, how does it get your attention? And we'll just get curious about that. And oftentimes that client will say, well, I hear it. All right, well, tell me about its voice. What does it sound like? Or a client will say, oh, I can imagine that critical voice. I can see it just pointing its finger at me. Okay, tell me more about that. How big is it? I'll often ask, where is that part in or around your body? Oftentimes we feel it inside. Oh, my stomach hurts. Okay, let's get to know that. If that stomach ache could speak, what would it say? If that part got to have a voice today, what would it say? And little by little, the parts start to differentiate where we can see, oh, there is a critical part. There is an anxious part. There is a people pleaser part. There is a part who does risky behaviors. There is a part who uses substance or behavior to numb out. And as we tease apart and untangle what feels like just me, then we can start to get some clarity. And that's such a valuable part of a therapeutic experience is clarity.
Huge.
Just being able to see and feel things that before felt so confusing and tangled up and complex.
And also just to not say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
I am that person that does this risky behavior or that has this addiction or that is anxious. But to say that's a part of you.
That's a part.
That is so, it is amazing how enlightening that feels. And to not feel like this is my prison sentence forever because I'm now critical, right? I have all this self-criticism or I'm anxious. No, that's a part of you and it's doing a job, right? And as you're talking, I was thinking back on Riley and thinking of the different parts and the way they looked and their voices and their colors. They were all different, right? And thinking back to understanding that movie had actually, they talked to a lot of people that do parts work and worked with them. And so from a clinician's perspective, and I'm sure you're the same way, boy, I was like, they are spot on. The way they're doing this, it's incredible. They did an incredible job.
Yes, they sought out very solid professional consultation.
They did.
On that movie. So what we're seeing play out is very, very accurate.
From a clinical perspective. It's actually incredible and yet made it so easy to understand and palpable that everybody could understand it. So really great. So our understanding of we're not trying to get rid of it. We're just trying to tease it out, meaning we're trying to just separate it from ourselves to kind of get to know that part of us as opposed to it being a part of it, right? It being us. It's just a part of us. So how do we get to know that part of us? Like if this is a listener who maybe isn't working with a clinician, how do they get to know that part of them as different from all of them?
So it's helpful to invite that part to unblend or disconnect from or differentiate from that self-energy by asking it to maybe come in front of me. Could you be in front of me? Can I see you? Or maybe you want to sit to the side of me. Inviting that part to be seen, like you said, we're getting to know an old friend, somebody who's been working on our behalf for a long time. And we can see our parts better when we're looking toward the part rather than looking from the part.
So how does somebody do that? Because again, if I'm just by myself and I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how do I get a part to come in front of me? Like, what do I do? Do we need to work with a clinician for this? I mean, give me your thoughts on this.
Most of the time, I recommend that someone start with a clinician. It can be challenging in the beginning to do this work alone.
I agree.
It can be really hard. So if anyone listening is wondering, I don't think I can do this, come and talk to me.
Yeah.
And once you get some help, somebody supporting you, and somebody who in the room, I'm showing up in my self energy. I'm calm. I'm confident. I'm curious. And I am grateful that this client's parts are showing up. All parts are welcome. I want to know as many as are ready to show up in that room. That can give parts a sense of safety. And oftentimes that happens first with a clinician before it can happen with the sense of self.
So true. I couldn't agree with you more. I really think that parts work can be a little bit confusing. And so to get help from a clinician is really valuable. I will say, there are books that I have recommended and workbooks that I recommend, but it's typically after there's been some understanding of parts work. We talked about No Bad Parts that Richard Schwartz wrote. That's excellent.
Yes.
The self-therapy workbook is also one that's an excellent resource for understanding parts and doing some of this differentiating that you talked about.
Yeah.
And I will say, it's really helpful to have an understanding from a clinical perspective when you begin this work. But again, going back to this part that is critical, recognizing that this part has a good intention.
Yeah.
How do we offer ourselves some self-compassion or gratitude for this part? Because again, when you used your example, you said this people-pleasing part, it's not really helping you. So the self-critical part comes in and says, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? That's not helpful. How do we have compassion really on both of those parts? Because they're both trying to help you. They're not maybe doing a very good job, but they're trying because they did a good job at one point. You said as a kid, it really helped you.
I needed
helped you feel loved and connected, right? So how do we really look at these parts and offer ourselves compassion or gratitude for the work that these parts are doing?
I most often see that happen with gratitude. So one of the first things that I'll do with a client, and one of the first things I experienced personally as I was getting to know my parts, was practicing experiencing gratitude for that part. Being willing and brave. It took a lot of courage to be able to thank that part for trying to help me. Regardless if it did help or not, being able to thank that part for its intent. And once I started feeling even just a little sliver of that gratitude, then pretty soon compassion can start to find a space inside of one's heart and mind, right? And some understanding, some clarity. Oh, I get why that part was doing that.
So can we step back a minute? Offering gratitude to a part that feels like it's causing tons of problems, even though we're learning that these all have good intentions, that is not easy to do.
It's not easy.
Right? So I wonder if the beginning is maybe getting curious about that part. Like what is this part trying to do? Why is it doing this? What is it afraid of? Can that help before we get to gratitude?
Yes, and thank you. That does happen before gratitude. So as we're differentiating the parts, we're also getting to know their different jobs.
Yes.
What are you showing up to do? How are you trying to help the whole internal parts?
And to understand that they're intense and sometimes what they're doing are different. Right? So the intention of your people-pleasing part is to keep you connected, to keep you safe, to keep you loved. But it actually isn't often doing that work, right? But that's what it has done for you as a child. So its intention versus what it's actually doing are two different things.
And once we can better understand that and see that, then gratitude comes a little more safely.
So curiosity first. Okay.
Curiosity.
Good. So what I'm hearing is our question originally was, how do I silence or get rid of that self-critical part? And we're actually saying, you don't.
We don't get rid of any parts of us. That's not our agenda. That's not our intent. They are parts of us and they matter. They have done work on our behalf for often as long as we can remember. So instead of getting rid of that part, we want to offer them an opportunity to choose a new job. When they're ready, and that doesn't happen in the beginning. Oftentimes, parts just need to be sat with and understood. We need to practice curiosity with the parts until they're ready to even consider trying something different. As that people-pleasing part starts to heal, because my inner child parts are healing through therapeutic work, then that critic part can start to heal. It can practice trusting my sense of self to do more grown-up jobs of the gentle art of saying no, for example, rather than people-pleasing, or trying on a new regular daily practice rather than an old unhelpful habit. Then my parts can start to trust that sense of self, that sunshine that starts to come out, that's a little more confident, that's a little more calm, that remains curious and courageous.
So are you saying that we can train these parts to show up differently?
We invite these parts to show up differently.
We invite these parts.
Yep.
So we don't say we need to get rid of you. We just say, we see what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And we actually, there's a different way to do it that will serve me better.
Oftentimes, these protective parts are exhausted. They have been doing a lifetime of work that doesn't really meet the goal that was intended all along. Oftentimes, they're exhausted. And when given permission to step back and relax a little bit, they're ready.
Yes.
And when they're invited to consider a new job, oftentimes those parts know just what they would rather do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes parts in the beginning don't know what they'd rather do because they've only known this one job. My critic only knew that one job of inner critique. But as I experienced a healing process, my young inner child parts healing, my protector parts healing, my sense of self getting stronger, eventually that inner critic picked a new job. And it's an interesting new job. Do you want to hear?
Yes.
That part of me now holds a clipboard and a flashlight. That's its job.
To do what? What's it doing?
So it holds the clipboard because maybe it needs to take some notes or identify some information that's important that we need to be aware of. Perhaps that people pleaser part starts to get a little bit active and wonder, ooh, can I do this old strategy? And this critic, instead of criticizing that part, it'll actually just jot it down on a little clipboard. And mind you, this is all internal. This is all my internal experience with this part of me. Visually, when I think of that part, it's holding that clipboard and it's proud and able to do that job. It also holds a flashlight because what I discovered is part of this job's protective intent was to keep me safe. It helped me see danger before I could recognize danger. So now it just holds a flashlight and it trusts me, my sense of self, to be able to recognize when something is unsafe or unhelpful. And it just holds the flashlight to help me see that.
So let me just back up a minute. You don't experience it as critical anymore. Like I'm hearing more, it's shining a light on things. So kind of seeing things, right? And then also you're saying a clipboard. So it's taking notes. It's maybe sitting in curiosity or just taking like, this is actually what's happening. So it's really changed its role is what I'm hearing.
It's changed its role and it hasn't changed its intent. It still wants me to be okay. It still wants me to be safe. It still wants me to make decisions that are based in my values.
That makes sense. Yep.
But it doesn't do it in that critical, pokey, painful, self-condemning way that it used to.
Boy, can you notice a shift in yourself?
Absolutely. I used the words earlier in the episode. I felt uncomfortable and irritable in my own skin. I don't feel that nearly as tensely as I have throughout my life. Not even close. When I do feel that, it doesn't last as long. I'm able to work through that and process it, literally metabolize out that discomfort of my body. And it doesn't happen as frequently.
Is that like so amazing? Really?
Yes.
I mean, we talk about that. That's a big deal when that self-critical voice has been there for so long. When you say, you know what, it doesn't show up that way anymore. I don't experience it that way. I mean, that's a really big deal. That's awesome. So tell me this, Whitney, with everything we've talked about, is there anything in addition that I have not asked you or that we've left out about this self-critical voice? And I really think, by the way, we've turned this on its head a little bit. Like, instead of here are all the strategies to get rid of it, actually, let's befriend it. Let's see what it's trying to do. What's its intention? And getting curious about it. And actually, that's what changes it, not pushing it down and trying to get rid of it. That's usually when those parts get louder.
They get louder, more insistent.
Exactly. But really befriending the part.
Yeah.
There's a big, big difference. So anything that I've left out that I haven't asked you?
Let me share maybe a tool that people could try as they're perhaps getting curious about their own parts. I call it parts mapping. I'll take a piece of paper, and in the top left corner, I'll start to write out maybe some of the pain that I'm experiencing. Maybe it's that critical voice that I'm hearing. I'll write down the words that I'm hearing in my mind, or I'll write down the behaviors that I'm doing that are coming from a place of pain. But what I'm doing there is I'm writing down these different protective parts. What do they sound like? What are they doing? How are they showing up? Then in the top right corner, I'll write down some of my manager parts. These are also protectors, but these are the parts that are a little more shiny and socially acceptable on the outside. They almost always show up with my other parts that are a little bit more messy. And I'll note those. I'll write them down. And then at the bottom of the page, I'll write down some of the little Whitney hurts, some of the inner child pain that may be coming up. I'll write that down at the bottom. Maybe it's something that I'm afraid of, or something that I'm worried about, or maybe a belief about myself that I've carried from childhood that isn't true. And then in the middle, I'll start to write down how I am experiencing my sense of self. Now, oftentimes, if I'm in pain, I'm not really experiencing my sense of self. I just know that I have before, and I know what it's been like before. So oftentimes, I'm writing down some of those C words where I'm confident, I'm calm, I can be curious, I can be grateful for these parts as they show up, and I'll do some writing there. Or sometimes I'm drawing pictures. Sometimes it's easier for me to draw a tangled up ball of string, and that's how I feel at the bottom of the page. But that's a way to start to differentiate and tease apart these different parts. And once I do that, then I can see a little bit more clearly, oh, this is what's going on. Oh, that's just a part of me. Oh, no wonder this protector is showing up, because this little part is really afraid today. There's something really scary happening. And once I do that, then I can start to practice now stepping into that sense of self, not just knowing it in my head, but trying to feel it toward these parts. Again, usually starts with curiosity. What's going on? How come you're afraid today? And I'll ask myself those questions almost like I'm talking and having a dialogue with that little part of me.
Oh, it's so powerful. Do you do that often? Like, is that something you do when you bump up against there's something going on internally, and you'll go ahead and map
I
those
do
out?
that often. I do. That, let me say, has only come after years and years of practice.
For sure.
Therapeutic help in the beginning, and then my own practice, personally and individually. But I do that often. I did that as I was driving to the studio today. A little part of me is afraid to come and do a podcast, and it's a young part that believes it needs to show up and do this job. And so I just had a little conversation with that part in the car, reminding it that I'm grown up. I invited that young part to see where I am in time and space. I'm an adult. I'm a grown up. Childhood is over. And then I invited that part to maybe pick a different job. It doesn't have to do a podcast. What would it rather do? And most often, those little parts will pick a very childlike job. It just wants to go out and play, wants to go play in the field. And it's going to hang out back behind here in the trees until we're done.
Wow. So powerful. It really is. It's one of those concepts. It's called internal family systems that we're discussing. And it really is a powerful, powerful way of understanding what's going on inside of you. It really is. And I love that you, on the way here, we're doing that, right? And I agree with you. I do something similar, and it is been an amazing tool to help me get clear about what's going on. When I feel there's something off, doing some of that work, it's incredible what, how you can, like you said, put to rest some of those anxieties or fears or things that are coming up and get really clear about it when you're not sure to begin with, right? Like you're driving to the studio and going, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? And you go, oh, wait, there's a little girl part of me. There's a little Whitney here that's feeling scared or insecure, and recognizing that part, validating that fear, and then asking it to do a different job. Yeah, it's really powerful. So I really appreciate the conversation. I hope it was insightful to our listeners, because it is such a powerful way to heal. It is, can be a life-changing way to heal, to recognize that these parts are not bad. They're actually trying to help us. They're trying to do a job, and that we're not trying to get rid of that self-critical voice, but we're trying to get curious about it and befriend that part of us. And if we can do that, boy, it is a changing experience. And like you said, I love the transition from your critical voice to actually that part of you that has a clipboard and a flashlight.
It's still a helper, but it's a helper based in my values.
Yeah.
It supports the values of my sense of self.
Yeah. It's amazing. So I really hope that for our listeners, this has been insightful. I think it is a tool that so many people can use, and that can help you as you're navigating some of these parts of ourselves that can feel frustrating and that can feel confusing, and to recognize, boy, that there is a lot of work we can do with this, and to recognize we have no bad parts, that our parts are all trying to do a job, even that self-critical voice that we hear inside of our head. We appreciate you joining us. Whitney, thanks for joining us as well. And until next time, take care.